Hey everyone, welcome back to Sophomore Citizens. I'm Gigi.
I'm Liesel.
And I'm Lily.
Okay, so to start off today's episode as a check in, we will be talking about some TikTok health, beauty, and wellness trends. Gigi, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. I had thought of this as a check-in because I'm seeing gua sha, I'm seeing chlorophyll everywhere on TikTok. I'm seeing people talk about it, I'm seeing people try it. And I don't know. I mean, I have thoughts and I'm sure that you two have thoughts, so I figured it would be an appropriate thing for us to check in about. So I will say about gua sha, this is something I've heard of before TikTok, but it obviously didn't have nearly as much of a, far-reaching fan base as it now does. So Liesel and I ordered some and they just arrived. I haven't gotten to try mine yet. Liesel, did you try yours yet?
Not yet.
Okay. So we have not tried ours yet, but we have them. And I feel positively about the fact that it has both like uh internal and external effects, like that
Mhm.
it and to me it does sort of check out that there's this lymphatic drainage element with also like, some depuffing of the face. But I'm curious to see what our personal results are or what the experience is. And as far as chlorophyll goes, like I was seeing some back and forth, which I imagine you girls both saw some portion of as well, of this girl being like, you guys, this is not going to do anything for you. Like our bodies don't photosynthesize. Like we can't utilize this, and there's no sun in your stomach. And then this other girl coming back by being like, but there's actually this other thing, chlorophyllum or something like that, that does have some benefit to the human body. And even when this girl said this stuff about the sun and whatever, I was like, okay, yeah, that is true. But there are also like unintended effects of things, you know? So in
Right.
my brain, I was like, if enough people are experiencing the same results of like this internal deodorant or whatever, like clearly people's bodies are reacting to something that's going on. Like maybe it's not reacting the same way that plants use chlorophyll, but like it must be doing something. And actually, we've had some familiarity with chlorophyll because of Creation Organic, a beautiful chain of restaurants, smoothie bars, etc., in the beautiful city of Los Angeles. And to be honest, I never really liked to drink it because I'm like, I just want regular water. But I could see how it would help with digestion and help with your GI tract and whatever the F else. So I'm curious to know what you both think.
Okay, this is such a timely discussion because I was successfully swayed by the chlorophyll trend and started chlorophyll consumption day one yesterday. So I literally can't believe that you wanted this to be our check-in, G, because this is exactly where my mindset is. So I ordered my chlorophyll because I've been having some skin issues. Yes,
Chloe, I have
Gigi.
a question. Do you have the minty flavored one or the because when people started saying that, I was like, I've tried it before at Creation and literally there's no minty flavor. Like what?
I had the same thought process. And part of the reason I wanted to do it was because I was like, I've had the creation. I know this is fine. I did a bunch of research to make sure it was a safe, good thing for my body. I talked to my mom about it. And she was like, okay, let's just try it. Because from what I could find, the only real side effects were like it could make you nauseous or like give you some stomach issues, in which case you just stop taking it. Like it's not like long term scary side effects. So mine has zero flavor whatsoever. Like the creation one has more of a taste than the one I ordered. I had it twice yesterday, and obviously I think it's a little too soon to see results. But I was also seeing some stuff on TikTok of people being like, this is bullshit. All it's encouraging you to do is drink more water, and that's why people have better skin results. So that was some of the pushback I was seeing. And I was also seeing a lot of the other stuff you were talking about, G, of like, this isn't going to do anything. Then I also saw some girl being like, it's activated chlorophyll. It's already been activated by the sun. So it will do things for your body. Like, it's not, I don't, there's been a lot of stuff all over
The
the
other
place.
thing I will just add about water consumption, like I know all three of us to be hydrated queens. Like there's nothing about that green water that's going to be encouraging me to drink any more water than I already do.
Yes.
That's a good point, Gigi. That's a good point for sure. Yeah, so I, as has been said, like I have had chlorophyll water many times due to the Creation Cafe. They will typically bring you your water and then they bring around like a little dropper, and they'll offer to drop in this green, chlorophyll stuff that's supposed to make the water more healthy. And my dad, who I oftentimes go to Creation with, loves to ask for it specifically and call it, instead of chlorophyll, chloroform. And this always like gets a different reaction from the waiter. When my dad's like, "Could I get extra chloroform in there?" Some waiters just, brush it off as a simple mistake. Some feel the urgent need to correct him. "No, that's a deadly substance. That's actually chlorophyll that we're putting in there." And I think it's funny because with this chlorophyll trend on TikTok, now I've seen a bunch of like, meme kind of TikToks call like, saying, "Oh, I'm going to put a bunch of chloroform in my water now." So I just thought that was kind of funny that Luke, my dad, has been originating that joke since pretty much day one. But one TikTok that I saw that I think, to me seemed the most plausible or like a good explanation of this whole phenomenon was this woman. I believe she was a doctor of some variety or maybe in med school. And she was saying that the amount of chlorophyll that is in, one dropper full, so one like glass that you would drink, there's more in a cup of spinach, and that a cup of spinach also has other vitamins and minerals and good stuff for your body. So she was kind of like, you can drink this water that has chlorophyll in it, or you could get chlorophyll from just like eating more plants in your diet, and eating more plants in your diet will also have more other health benefits.
Okay, listen, I totally get that, but I feel like that's always something like that everyone is saying. Anytime that there is some sort of alternative way to consume vitamins and minerals, the response is always like, "Oh, you should just be getting this from a variety of whole foods in your diet." And it's like, yeah, that's great in fantasy land, but I truly do believe that more people will be getting like this chlorophyll or whatever through drinking multiple like water bottles of it throughout the day than eating a cup of spinach. Like I don't think that people I think that people are more likely to buy into this chlorophyll stuff and actually like use it for like enough time to see if they do have positive results before they're just going to start eating a cup of spinach every day. You know what I mean? I feel like there will be higher compliance with the chlorophyll routine than just being like, "Oh, eat the spinach." Especially because it feels like that's not, or like just eating a whole food diet or whatever doesn't feel like it's controlled enough to see results that you can trace back to the cup of spinach or the whatever. Whereas
Right.
with the chlorophyll, that's a very clear, like, I wasn't doing this before, I am doing this now. Let's see how my body reacts.
Right. But I do think like, if the trend was just eat a cup of spinach, every day, people wouldn't do it.
No.
Which is, it's just an interesting human phenomenon that we could say like, okay, you can either drink this weird green water that everyone's drinking, or you could just eat like literally a cup more vegetables every day, and people will choose the weird green water, even if they know that it's not as good for them, just because it feels easier.
Well, and the other thing is like this cup of spinach, like this magic cup of spinach, like is that going to give the internal deodorant? Is that going to help your GI tract? Is that going to do all the things that chlorophyll is claiming to do?
Okay,
Well,
look,
it has the
this
same amount of chlorophyll, so yeah, it should.
Okay, but this is exactly why I brought it upon myself to do it, because I was seeing this back and forth. This girl on TikTok literally was like, "I've been on Accutane 3 times," which I don't think you're supposed to do, so that's a problem in itself. And none of that worked until I did this. This is better, whatever. So I am here on behalf of the Sophomore Citizens community, on behalf of everyone I know. I'm really doing a mitzvah for you all to figure out whether or not this actually works, because I was like, it's not going to hurt me, so I might as well just try it. And people are saying they're seeing results very quickly. So hopefully next time we record an episode, I can report back on how it's going. I'm taking progress pictures of my skin and seeing what's happening. So I will keep
And
everyone
Lily,
updated.
may I ask, if you don't mind sharing, on Zoom, I'm not seeing I'm seeing a flaw in sight. Like, what is the skin issue that we're talking about so that we can actually track the progress of that skin issue?
Yes, thank you very much for complimenting my skin on Zoom. I will say that I do think my skin looks good today, and I do think the timing of me starting this wasn't the best because my skin kind of started clearing up yesterday, right as this was starting, but I was just having a lot of breakouts on like the perimeter of my face, which is typically my breakout area. I don't think this is going to fix my blackheads, but the blackheads on my T-zone is something that I've always been very self-conscious about and looking for fixes for. So those would be the two things that I'm hoping to improve via chlorophyll water, but we'll see.
That is very interesting. I'm very excited to see the results. And I will, still be here for all of my sophomore scientists, which is what I'll call the small part of our community that loves science and studies as much as I do. And, I will take what you say, Lily, and what everyone says about this with a little grain of salt. But I do also want to talk about the gua sha, but I also want to talk about another health wellness thing that I personally have been kind of wanting to try and dipping my toe in. So, as you girls know, I have been wearing my Whoop bracelet, which is a fitness tracking bracelet, for a couple months now. And one of the metrics that it measures is heart rate variability. Don't ask me what exactly that is, but it's just a number, and you want to have a higher number more often than not. And that's tracking like how able your body is to recover and like how quickly your heart rate can go back down to normal, I think. And so I was reading this article from the Whoop website that was saying some advice on how to get your heart rate variability up. And one of the tips is to make sure that within 20 minutes of waking up, you spend a few minutes outside soaking in the sun. And then in the evening, you should watch the sunset happen. And it claims on the website to help with your circadian rhythms, help you get better sleep, and help your natural, sleep rhythms operate properly. And it said, therefore, that by doing this and getting better sleep, that can help with athletic performance, it can help with weight loss, it can help with mood, and several other things like vitamin D, making sure you're getting that, all of these beautiful, wonderful benefits. So I personally am hoping to every day try this to within 20 minutes of waking up, go outside and greet the sun, and really make a concerted effort to sit outside and watch the sunset, at least a little portion of it.
Yeah, do you know like how much of the sunset you're supposed to see, or like what what if you're in a place where you just simply can't even observe the sun like as it's going down?
Yeah, I think that like the idea is like, to perceive the sun setting. So
Okay.
it's basically just saying like don't be in like a dark movie theater, for example, like during sunset, or like sometimes I really do like miss the sunset and I just don't even notice it happening, and then all of a sudden I look outside and it's dark. I think that's
Yeah.
what you don't want. So it's not about like, really you have to like see the sun, go on the horizon line like every single day, but I think it's like making sure that your body perceives that gradual dimming of
Okay, yeah. No, that makes sense. That makes sense. I will also add, this is from a recent lecture that I had about affection and how approximately 45 minutes after you wake up is when your cortisol spikes, and that's when you're most stressed. So if you can get some like physical affection in that period of time, it can severely reduce your stress in that morning time and for the rest of the day, because basically your cortisol spikes 45 minutes after you wake up, and then from there it like levels out throughout the day, is supposedly how like our bodies naturally deal with it. And I also feel like maybe greeting the sun would be like a stress reducing, cortisol reducing like activity as well.
I'm no sophomore scientist, but Liesel, of all the things we've talked about, this makes the most sense in my brain of something that absolutely checks out in terms of like even just the weight loss thing. Like at first when you said that, I was like, how the heck is going outside and watching something with my eye gonna change weight loss? But I know that like when you're tired, you eat more to have more energy. And so if you're sleeping better because of that, the thought is you wouldn't be as tired, so then maybe you're not like excess eating. Like this all definitely checks out to me. So this feels like the most full proof of the health and wellness trends, which is I think speaks to maybe the other ones that are on TikTok, and this that isn't. The other ones aren't so, but we'll see. But this is a very interesting one, and I hope that you share updates on it.
I will certainly share updates. And I'm thinking about maybe like making a chart because, all three of us know how
We love
powerful
our
charts can be. And I think if I had a visual like check, I had to check that I went and greeted the sun and I have to check that I saw the sunset. I think I would be much more likely to complete this because I've been saying for a while that I want to do this every day and make sure that I do my greetings and my goodbye to the sun, but I just haven't done it like very consistently because it's so easy to forget to do it. So I think I'm going to make a chart. And so also talking about the gua sha, just briefly, I'm very excited to start that challenge. And I think that's something, it's not a challenge, start that practice in my life of doing the gua sha facial exercises with this tool. And I will also update Sophomore Citizens and the Sophomore Scientists on how that whole journey goes, because I'm really, really hoping that I don't have to get Kybella, which is what dissolves your double chin. Like I'm hoping that the gua sha like does what Kybella does and just like really snatches my neck. And then I just like won't have to worry about that again.
I hope that
Okay.
for you too.
Thank you, Lily. Okay, beautiful. So now we will move into the main topic for today's episode, which is, of course, a celebration of the fact that this is our 50th episode, which is just so incredible. Like it brings tears to my eyes. It brings joy to my heart that we have created a now over 50 hours, probably even considerably more than that, of beautiful, wonderful content that like we can always have and can always come back to and listen to. And like, it's really like a little, like video diary of so many unique conversations and moments that we get to look back on. Like, how beautiful is that?
I really am just overcome with so much pride. Like, if I were to label my emotions right now, that is the thing beaming through me. And I actually got to have the very cool experience twice in the past week of interacting with people who listen to this podcast that I didn't know. And it really is just like, I cannot believe that this thing that started as like an idea in our heads of like, oh, we have fun conversations, maybe other people would want to listen to them, has played out. And the pride and joy I have for this podcast and making it is overwhelming. Like, I really feel like it is beaming out of me. So I'm just so happy for us and proud of us and want to celebrate this moment.
I also feel just such a strong sense of accomplishment for this project, especially because although it's not like unbelievably time consuming like week to week, it does, require some effort from all three of us. And I feel like the fact that, at least once a week we're chunking out the amount of time that we do to get together and record and edit and upload whatever, like it feels like such a whole little project that is like, I don't want to say complete because it's never complete, like obviously Sophomore Citizens forever, but like it is a contained autonomous being, you know what I mean?
Totally. So I think in celebration of these 50 episodes, would be fun for us today to pull back the curtain and, really dive into some behind the scenes and some kind of stories that we don't really talk about on the podcast as much, and just kind of our overall thoughts on the podcast. So this will be the pod that's about the pod. And I think that it'll be fun to like share, you know, kind of the inception of the podcast, how we really feel about it, and just have some reflections on the podcast as a whole, which I think will be really fun. So to start off, like I would love for us to each talk a little bit about if we were initially interested in podcasting, if we enjoy listening to podcasts, like what our relationship with podcasts was pre Sophomore Citizens.
So I will say that I did not really listen to podcasts. I don't really listen to podcasts, and it's not because I don't enjoy them. Like I do think it is interesting. Oh, well, I will say currently I'm a very loyal fan to Frenemies. I will occasionally listen to the Morning Toast. But I just feel like I'm such a music person when I'm doing homework or I'm driving or whatever that like podcasts don't really fit into my lifestyle very well. Um, but what I think is interesting, and I guess we'll get into more of the inception of our podcast in a bit, but like, you know, we had this idea going back to like far before the pandemic and quarantine and everything. And I just feel like it has become rather trendy to like be doing podcasts, and everyone and their sister has a podcast now. But I feel also like ahead of the curve in the way that we were like, you know, ready to begin our podcast journey even far before that.
Yes, we are cool and trendy no matter what. And I think you're right, G. I'm gonna self-identify as podcast queen. Not a day that I can remember in my recent past has gone by where I have not listened to, I don't know. I listen to multiple podcasts a day. I love podcasting and listening to them. I would say that it's my favorite medium, or like entertainment medium. Like I would choose it over TV, movie, music, anything. It is my favorite. Yes,
Lily, I have a question. How do you feel about the visual component to podcasts? Because personally, like, I love when I can listen to a podcast but also watch them. Like I love that.
I like it, but I just love that podcasting can always be with me. So that's not as conducive to it, and that's part of why I love it so much, is because no matter where I am, what I'm doing, I can have the podcast in my ear. So I'm not like, I love a good video component, and I think it's fun to see like connect faces to voices and whatever, but that's not crucial to me. So the fact that I am able to star in a podcast of my own and like be a part of this trend and something I love so much, and like do that for other people, even if those other people is just a small group of our loyal fans, that brings me so much joy and is so exciting for me.
Totally. And I would say that I maybe am somewhere in between you two. I am definitely a music over podcast kind of girl. But when I was working in an office, you know, a 9 to 5 job, I really did find podcasts very helpful to just get through the day. Because you can only listen to so much music, like when you're working a full day. And um, so I really found podcasts to be very comforting. And I really enjoy about podcasts when you can learn from them and enjoy them. I think that also another barrier for me with podcasts is like I love to read, and I like to read fast and sometimes like skip around, and like, you know, that's how I like to absorb information. And sometimes I feel like podcasts are too slow, especially like educationally based podcasts. Like I'm just like get to the point where I just like want to be absorbing the information faster. And sometimes I find podcast voices really triggering. Like I feel like certain people's voices, like just they sound really condescending to me, and I don't enjoy being condescended to.
See, okay, I don't necessarily have this issue of being condescended to, but that's why I like the visual component more.
Mm,
Or like I like when I can have the visual component, because I feel like even if someone were to have an annoying voice, it would completely go over my head if I'm looking at them. Whereas if I'm only listening and I'm really like tuned in on their voice, if they have an annoying voice, I'm going to have an issue with that. Like Morning Toast,
Right.
I literally could never just listen to them. I have to watch them.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I feel like when you see the people, you tend to get less annoyed by them. Speaking of which, if you get annoyed by listening to our voices, head over to YouTube and try out watching this episode and see how you feel about that, because maybe we'll be less annoying. Okay, so I think that's a good intro to how we each felt about podcasts pre being podcasters ourselves. So to kind of start off the story of how Sophomore Citizens became what it is, we have to go back to summer of 2019, I think, when we initially kind of got this idea to start a podcast. And we ended up recording a first episode to this podcast idea that we had called the Opinionated Pod, or the Opinionated Podcast. I don't know what exactly we called it. But basically, we sat down in our living room with not even a microphone, like just a phone, just hit record and just started talking about some various topics. I remember specifically we were talking about Olivia Jade and her whole, college admission scandal. And just, we thought that we would each kind of bring like a pop culture topic, and we would just talk about 3 pop culture topics. And looking back on that, like, first of all, I do think that would have been listenable. Like, I think that that podcast was like an okay conversation and could be listenable. But I remember feeling so uncomfortable with it a little bit, like just feeling like, having something recording me was definitely like a very foreign thing. And obviously when we were recording it, like sometimes I kind of forgot we were recording, but I remember being very cognizant for the most part that we were being recorded.
That was not my experience at all. I don't remember feeling uncomfortable whatsoever. Like, obviously, there was a bit of a learning curve with it. Like, we were maybe a little bit like, okay, we don't really know what to say or how to like facilitate the conversation. But like, yeah, once we were past the like transitions or whatever, I felt completely comfortable. Like, and I also didn't, even in the transitions or whatever parts we were a little bit unsure about, I didn't feel weird about it being recorded or like anything.
I just remember feeling kind of nervous. Like, I was like, I literally think this can be the greatest thing in the world. Like, as someone who listens to so many podcasts and loves them so much and has always had a dream of like getting to be that, I was like, okay, I literally think that this group of 3 is the best group to make a podcast. This, like, there's so much riding on, not like so much actually riding on it, but like in my head, I had such high hopes. And then I remember recording being like, I just hope this is like working out as great as I know it can. And like, I'm nervous it's not going to be perfect, which honestly kind of feels like a trend, which we'll get to, of like my feeling towards making this podcast in general is just like having such high hopes and then being nervous that it's not going to work out. But opinionated pod, Liesel, I agree, definitely could have worked. And I also remember there being a point in which, rather than 3 pop culture topics, there was a time in which we were all going to bring in like a topic from something that we're specifically familiar with. Like, I remember, Liesel, you potentially bringing in a psychology thing, me potentially bringing in like a politics thing. Gigi, I don't know what yours was, but I'm sure it was great too. And like having like a blended topic podcast, but that was so long ago.
Yeah, I remember that too. And I remember like, I mean, being open to it because I didn't have necessarily like a better suggestion, but I remember being like, I don't like the idea of being like confined to a single topic for me every week, you know?
Yeah. And I think it's funny, like the Opinionated Pod is just like such a bad name. Like I just like
first of all, it was the Opinionated Podcast, okay?
Wait,
And
I
second of
remember
all,
it just being opinionated.
or opinionated, but
Okay,
I remember
sorry,
it either being
opinionated.
opinionated or the Opinionated Podcast. Like, I think
Okay,
that was
sorry.
something we were going back and forth on.
Okay, sorry. I'm so sorry that I misspoke. Regardless, I think that opinionated is like, and maybe I don't even know who came up with it. Like, I'm not trying to be like some type of way towards whoever created it. Like, I might have created it, but I just feel like it's so like vanilla. Like it just has no like a distinguishing quality of being us. Like anyone could be opinionated. You know what I mean? And so when I think about that in comparison to the Sophomore Citizens, which in my opinion is a very powerful name, like I just couldn't think they're more different, you know?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I don't think that opinionated is a bad name whatsoever. Like, I would not go on the record and be like, that's a bad name, the way that Liesel just did. But I do agree that Sophomore Citizens has obviously so much more flavor, so much more rich context and history and hidden meaning. Like, it's, just absolutely like fits, and it fits our whole thing so much better than the opinionated podcast. Like I really do believe that the ethos of our podcast like shines through in the name and in our content, whereas the opinionated podcast is a little bit more amorphous, and like I think that it took time for things to take shape the way that they did.
Liesel, I'm with you. I think it's a horrible name. I'm so glad that we never went that route. I mean, like, I guess it's fine, but like boring. Even like the SEO on that. You look up opinionated, like, oh, you get a
Right.
million results. Like, we're not here for that. We're not like amongst the million. We're the standout. So like that's just so boring.
And like for me, when you think about popular podcasts or popular things in general, when you think about them as a name, like before it became whatever it is, like for example, let's just say Uber, like if you had told me before the existence of Uber that there was going to be like a car sharing, ride share taxi system called Uber, I'd be like, that's such a stupid name. Like that doesn't mean anything. But then when it becomes Uber, like it's iconic, and I feel the same way about Sophomore Citizens versus like the opinionated podcast. It's like the opinionated podcast is so like on the nose of like what the podcast is. It's just us sharing our opinions versus like Sophomore Citizens being more of like its own unique thing that doesn't make sense at first, but then once you unpack it, it does make sense. So yeah, and I completely agree, Gigi, that I feel that the name Sophomore Citizens not only like encapsulates what we do, but also informs what we do, and in that it emphasizes and underscores for us that like we're just trying to share our opinions as like, young adults, aka wise babies, just people who just don't know what's going on, but we're also like a little bit older. We're not like teenagers anymore. So personally, I love Sophomore Citizens, and I'm so glad we called it that. Do you girls have anything to share about the initial like first couple of episodes and the first couple of like brainstorming sessions that we had about Sophomore Citizens?
Something I really remember that I also kind of feel like I hinted at before was I remember recording the first few and being like, okay, like it's okay, but like it's not there yet, but like it's going really well. And I was like, we just need to like get a few episodes down and then like we'll have it, we'll take off, we'll be ready to go, we'll be international sensations. And having to, I mean, yes, there was a learning curve. And I think in my head, because we converse so well and we have such interesting thoughts and feelings and opinions to share, you were just going to put a mic in front of us and like that was going to translate to the rest of the world. I think that I soon became aware that like there's a little more that goes into it. And like Gigi said, yeah, it's not a huge time commitment, but like we have put so much work into this, and I don't think that initially occurred to me. And then once I figured that out, I was like, okay, well, everything's going to be perfect in 4 episodes. Like after the 4th episode, we will have figured it all out and it's going to be flawless. And I think that understanding that like, yes, podcasting is just talking, but like it's so much deeper than that. It's very layered, has been eye-opening for me.
I also think that that's such a Sophomore Citizens meta experience of Lilly believing that we were just going to have it all figured out, and then realizing that even when you feel like you have it figured out, some new variable gets thrown into the system and you're like, whoa, I don't know what's going on. And I feel like that's such a parallel to the young adult experience, where as soon as you feel like things are going well and you've got things figured out, something else arises and you're feeling confusion and you're feeling like, I don't know what's going on or who I am or anything. And obviously I'm exaggerating to a certain extent. Um, but it's the way that I see it in my mind is like a step, like an Aztec stepping stone or like stairs, where you ascend, plateau, ascend, plateau, ascend, plateau, and then that ultimately like results in growing up and learning and making progress as a human being. And in the same way with our podcast, I feel like it's been ascend, plateau. Like there's been some variation in the results that we produce or like, how an episode goes. But overall, like if you were to do a line of best fit, it still is going to be, being my sophomore scientist that I am, it's still going to be a positive slope.
Totally. And just like thinking back to those early days when we were like recording on a literal like $15 microphone that we bought from unnamed huge corporation that is very evil. Like we just didn't know what we were doing like at all. But it was really fun and exciting in the beginning, I think. And in preparation for this episode, I went and listened back to some random episodes and random segments, and one of the things that I feel like has evolved the most was the check-in. And in like our first couple of episodes, like they all start out with one of us just being like, Liesel, like, how are you doing? And I'm like, I'm doing very well. Like, who cares? And I remember Gigi specifically being like, we need to stop asking each other how we're doing and just being like, I'm good. Okay. Like, because it's just not a good way to start anything. And I feel like our check-ins now are sometimes my favorite part of episodes because we just get to talk about whatever we want and kind of catch up with each other in a way that's totally like natural and organic, but like I think fun to listen to.
I agree, Liesel. I also feel like our check-in is very podcast. Like the way that podcasts like that, and that's even something that I feel like I have disliked about some podcasts is like they just take the first 30 minutes to talk about literally whatever they want. And like sometimes that's great and sometimes that's not great. For us, obviously I love our check-ins. But I feel like we always choose something, whether it's current for the larger scale or if it's just something going on in one of our lives or all of our lives. Like I think that it is just a fun way to kick off the episode that like has some substance and isn't at all related to what the rest of the episode is going to be about.
Yeah. Maybe we could talk about what some of our favorite episodes have been that we've done. I don't know if you girls went back and picked out a couple favorites, but I definitely did. So one of the early ones that was one of my favorites was number 10, The Proof is in the Pod, which was all about parenting. And I feel like that was an episode where we got so much feedback from our parents and from other, people who listened. And I felt like that was an episode that really like sparked a lot of conversations, which I really enjoyed. And I also am just like passionate about the topic of psychology and parenting. And I think in a time capsule type of way, like that episode will be so fun to listen back to when we are parents, just to like see what we thought and what's different and all of that kind of stuff. So that's one of my favorites. Another obvious standout for me is number 12, The Positivity Pod, all about body positivity. I just thought that was a really vulnerable, open, good conversation about body positivity, which I think is a super important topic. And then a more recent episode that I really enjoyed was number 40, The Fashion Police Pod. I had so much fun like preparing for that episode and picking out the different trends and doing like a little bit of research and figuring out, what was going to be in fashion. And then it was so fun to talk to you guys about it.
So I will say that most of what I remember or like as far as picking favorite episodes, it's going to come down to my enjoyment of recording it because I don't go back and listen to all of them in full. Like, yeah, sometimes I will go back and listen or whatever, but I don't listen to every single one in full. So I'm just going off of memory. I remember loving the psychic pod. I don't remember if that's exactly what we called it, but like I loved that episode because I just like love rehashing the wild psychic experiences that we've had. And I just feel like there's just so much going on. I'm pretty sure that's also where we talked about Tuli's magic carpet ride, like just so many great things in that episode. And I just remember having so much fun recording that one. A more recent episode that definitely like goes down as one of my favorites to record was the one with guest star Eric, where we did advice from Reddit. Like, not only do I think that that is like just such a fun activity for us to do, but also like a great podcast episode, and also, you know, mad love for Eric, like great guest star. So I will cite those two as some of my favorites that just come off the top of my head, but I'm sure that there are other ones. Like, I'm pretty sure I also really enjoyed the one that we did about weddings or like something related to
That's
weddings.
mine.
Yeah, I remember having a lot of fun with that one too.
I definitely I think we called it the prenuptial pod. I loved that one. I thought it was so fun. And then I got to shout out Polypod Part 1 and Part 2 because those they were so fun to record, and I really think they turned out so well. And then the other one that I will give some love to is, I think it's called the Pinata Pod or the Party Pod, but I remember laughing so hard and just having such a great time. So I loved that one, and like telling the stories about partying that we did on that one was so fun.
Okay, so now maybe we can talk about some of the challenges or struggles or hurdles we have faced recording the podcast. I will definitely say that for me, one of the most challenging elements that I literally never would have anticipated being difficult is social media. And especially when, you know, there are not infinite pictures of the three of us together or infinite, you know, things for us to post about. I do find it really difficult to keep up with the Instagram and like stay creative in that element of the podcast.
I will also add, as head of social media for Sophomore Citizens, like part of the struggle is that there are no successful podcast Instagrams that I know of. And by successful, I mean like um not, you know, like a successful podcast is very likely going to have a successful Instagram followers wise, likes wise, no matter what they put out. And so, what I'm looking at when I'm trying to find inspiration from other podcasts is like, what are they doing that's getting engagement and that's like an interesting piece of content, whether that be visually or thematically, conceptually, I don't know. But like, everyone's Instagram for podcasts is ugly and stupid and basically useless, it feels like. Like, I'm yet to see a good podcast Instagram. So that also kind of creates a barrier for us and for me as head of social media, because without like something to draw inspiration from, it's difficult to know like what creative direction to take. And so, you know, we are mavericks in that way. We're just doing what we want to do and seeing what works and what doesn't. Um, but yeah, it is difficult, especially because posting random stuff doesn't really make sense. Always posting photos of us doesn't really make sense because it's not going to be in alignment with what we're talking about that episode. So it has been a real struggle. I will also say that we've had some interpersonal conflicts that have come up over the months of doing the podcast. I think it would be a misrepresentation to omit any of that. And, you know, we don't need to go into details, but of course, there have been disagreements of how things go over, or disagreements related to just outside stress or time issues, deadlines, whatever it might be. And I think that that's just it comes with the territory.
I will point out a very obvious one that I'm sure we're all thinking, but obviously recording remotely is very difficult. And when I'm recording in person with you guys, I know that I like feel differently. I feel like the conversation is different. It also affects like the editing process. I think because this podcast is largely unedited and meant to be just raw, real conversations. But when we do it over Zoom, there naturally are like technical difficulties or pauses that you have to cut out just for a more enjoyable listening experience. So I would be curious to know if it's just an internal thing or if externally you guys can like hear the difference. But I know for me, when we record on Zoom, it's definitely a struggle because when we're in person, I just feel like conversation flows better. We're all in different moods. It feels better, so it's been hard to acclimate to that.
100%. And I also think that, another challenge is coming up with new ideas to talk about every week. I feel like we were talking about with, some of our other ideas for podcasts where we each, bring a topic to the episode that's something that's very structured, like, pop culture or psychology or politics or whatever. I love the fact that our podcast is so broad and, covers so many topics, and one week can be really like reflective and introspective, and the next week can be really funny and silly. But that also like brings a lot of challenges because when you have like infinite, options out there, sometimes it's almost more limiting than having like a structured, type of topic for each week. And so for me, I know that that's been a challenge, but it's been like a really interesting and fun challenge to do that like brainstorming process and to work together to kind of like Lily will bring up one topic and then I'll kind of like put my spin on it, and then Gigi will like come up with some specifics for it and stuff. And I feel like that collaborative process is really fun and challenging, and totally like there's been interpersonal issues. I know that personally for me, like, I've learned a lot about myself through, doing the podcast, and I continue to learn to be less rigid and strict in my time management and my like type A tendencies. And I think that that's been like a personal area of growth for me that I feel like has been really strong. Do you girls feel like there's any like personal growth that you've done with the podcast?
I think I mean this more than it's just going to sound very literal, but I think that it's helped my communication skills, which obviously I'm speaking, that's a communicative skill, but I mean that like more specifically in my relationships with you guys of like how we phrase things to one another, how to clearly communicate ideas or feelings. Both in the way of like, okay, if I'm speaking into a microphone, the goal is to do so eloquently and clearly, and how that has translated into my personal life and how I am in a conversation, or if I need to relay information about the podcast. I think that that is somewhere that I have grown, or at least am growing, and am looking at from a different perspective than I did before the podcast.
I don't know if I can necessarily cite some sort of specific personal growth from the podcast, but I think that it has allowed me and all three of us to explore a long form project like this. I think that like the way that school and oftentimes I think even work, like typically flows is that you have some sort of short term, even like a matter of a few months is still short term. And I feel like that's the longest that you're really dealing with one same thing. Um, and so I just feel like this has given us all the opportunity to explore, like I said, a long form project that has this room and this space to breathe and grow. While still being focused on the same output, you know? And so I just think that that's like an interesting way to understand growth as someone who has for the majority of my life been a student where it's this short-term output and then on to the next.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Gigi. And I think for me, another area of growth that's seems maybe like a little bit smaller, but I think is is still a good accomplishment is in the beginning, and before like doing a podcast, I really like hated listening to my own voice, listening to, you know, my own speech, like anything that I was saying. Like I did not enjoy like listening back. And I thought that editing the podcast would be really difficult to like have to listen back to our conversations and like just cringe a little bit about like not only the way that I sound, like my voice, but also like what I said. And I feel like editing the podcast has been really good in like giving myself like a thicker skin with that and having more self-confidence and just being like, I sound like a normal person. Like I don't sound weird or annoying or dumb or anything like that. And that's kind of like, I think it's a little bit of like a self negativity that I did have before, you know, doing the podcast. And now I can listen back to the podcast, edit the podcast, and I literally like feel nothing towards, no negativity, you know, towards my own voice and speech, which I think is a good, you know, point of growth.
Liesel, that makes me so happy to hear for you. And that also reminds me of another way that I feel like I similarly have grown that I didn't even think of until I heard you say that. But I think both in that way, because similarly, I thought that I sounded like such an idiot. And even in the beginning, when I was listening back, I'd be like, oh, like, why would you say it like that? Or like when I would hear you two say something, I'd be like, oh, they sound so great and normal when they say it. But then when I said it, I sounded so weird, which in reality is just my inner monologue attacking myself. But I think that I have always been sort of hard on myself in general. And I think that while that is still something I'm working on, being able to say a year ago, I love podcasting, I would love to have my own podcast, and then actually do it has given me so much self-confidence and like made me feel so good that like I was able to actually like play out something that I've wanted so much. And also in the way that you were just saying of hearing my voice and being not so critical of myself, I feel like it really has been a thing of self-love and a growth area in that way, because I really do feel like it has shaped me. And like the pride that I said I started this episode with, like I just feel so much pride and joy for this project. And the fact that I had a part in making it makes me feel like a better person. And having that for myself makes my self love all the stronger.
Okay, and next up, maybe we can talk a little bit about if we like listen to podcasts any differently now, or if there's any things that we think about podcasts that we didn't think about before.
I don't listen to podcasts, so I don't listen to it any differently. I think the only thing that I would like I hadn't necessarily thought about, or something that I now think about if I were to be listening to podcasts, is I guess just like content creation. And again, going back to the idea of this like long form project, the idea of having to come up with new things to talk about every single week, or like having fresh um substance, is more of a challenge than I think people think about. Like as a passive listener, you're just like, oh yeah, they're telling me a new thing this week. But as the person creating it, it takes a lot more effort. And so I feel like also thinking about how podcasts are structured and what they center their content around is something that I think is interesting as well.
I think that for me, it has humanized podcasting a little bit. I think that's always been something I've loved about podcasting, is that it felt like I was hanging out with a friend. But I think even sometimes I wasn't thinking about the person on the other side of the microphone, even though they felt like my friend, which sounds kind of weird. It doesn't make sense, but that's the way my brain was handling it. And I think that now that I've been on this side of it, when I listen to a podcast, I don't think like, oh, this is the most perfect thing ever, like I used to. Like when they not mess up, because it's conversation and I don't like to think of it like that, but when it's not going perfectly, I'm like, oh, like that's what I'm doing. And like it just makes it all the more natural. And so I think that it has humanized and normalized both on my end. Like now, when I will say something that I don't like the way I said it, I'm like, okay, well, when I'm listening to other podcasts, like I don't think about it like that. So it has reframed it in that way. And from the other side of when I'm listening to a podcast of like, okay, they sound just like me. And so it's been a nice back and forth because it's informed how I feel about my role as a podcaster, and it has helped me think about how I consider my favorite podcasters when I'm listening to them.
Yeah, I feel like I have personally gotten new perspective on podcasting. Like just realizing that it's more difficult in some ways and it's also easier than I thought it was in some ways, which I think is kind of an interesting dynamic. Like I think that keeping the flow of conversation, keeping things interesting, and like not having awkward pauses or moments or whatever, and just like really keeping up with the flow of conversation, and choosing your words, you know, carefully as you speak and saying the right things, like that can sometimes be really challenging. But I think in other ways, podcasting is as easy or easier than I thought it was, because at the end of the day, it is just a conversation. And when I listen to podcasts, Lily, like as you were saying, where there are little mess ups or awkward moments or kind of weird things that people say, like it really like reiterates to me just how human the whole podcasting experience is. And I think it's a really interesting medium that we have been exploring. Okay, so do we have any final thoughts and reflections or anything else to share about these 50 episodes?
I'm just so proud of us, and I've said it 1,000 times, but it just, I feel like I can't say it enough because this really, like, if I were to say, like, the things I've done in my life that feel the most, I don't know, the things I'm most proud of or, like, want to just highlight in my life, like, yes, I am only a sophomore citizen. I am 21 years old and I've been a student most of my life. So, like, what do I have to show for it? Like, I can show you some essays. So, like, maybe it's not such tough competition, but like making this podcast, sustaining this podcast, growing this podcast, and like being able to sit here and talk about it and reflect on it right now is really in that top 5. So, shout out to everyone who made this possible, and Liesel and Gigi, I'm so glad we're doing this. And it makes me so happy.
Yes,
Go, Gigi.
I would just like to say, similar to what you were saying earlier, Liesel, I love that we have hours and hours and hours of recorded conversation for us to all enjoy for years to come.
Totally. And I think like, you know, even if just like one person has like laughed at something that we've said on the podcast, or like, you know, internalized something, or like felt good about themselves, or felt like heard or, you know, related to, like that's still so cool that, you know, anyone has listened to any of our episodes and felt some reaction from it. Like I actually think that's a really gratifying, lovely little experience. And we're so grateful to all of the wise babies out there. And I am so grateful to Lily and Gigi for being the most wonderful, beautiful co-hosts. And I really feel like we each bring our own, you know, energy, our own ideas, our own vibe to the podcast. And I think that makes it really fun. So with that, we can go into some recommendations.
I have 2 recommendations for all of my females out there. First one is a brand that I bought a bra from that I really like. I'm sure that anyone who's ever purchased a bra knows the terror and horror of doing that, because, or maybe that's just me, but it's one of my least favorite activities ever. And I found this brand called Casabella, which makes a lovely item that I purchased. And as someone who struggles to find things they really like in the bra department, I just wanted to save some stress to others because they have a wonderful selection and it's very inclusive sizing. And I had a great experience ordering from them. So, highly recommend. My other female related recommendation is that I recently started using a period cup instead of tampons because I wanted to be a more sustainable human being and have been loving it so far. So there's a million on the internet, and it's very specific to the person because different things work for your body type. So do your research. There's like quizzes you can take based on your activity level and whatever and what you're looking for that will point you towards the right one. I ordered a Duchess cup, which is like one of the cheapest ones, and I just kind of wanted to try it out before I really committed. And honestly, I'm loving it, so I don't even know that I'm going to buy another one. So if you're even kind of considering that, I highly encourage you to do it because my experience has been great. And those are my 2 recommendations.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing, Lily. And with that, we want to say thank you for listening to Sophomore Citizens, the podcast by young people for young people, with new episodes about every Monday. So we will see you wise babies then. Be sure to follow us on Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, etc., all at Sophomore Citizens. And be sure to leave us a 5-star review.